Good morning. Welcome to this age-friendly WA workshop. I'm Andrew Kickeross, I'll be your MC for the day, and I'd particularly like to thank our speakers who've travelled far and wide. Jane from Toronto, Canada, Marlene from Sydney, and even those that have driven from UWA, which is on a day in Perth when it's raining, you know what it's like. First of all, I'd like to introduce Barry Maguire to do the Welcome to Country. Barry's a Balladong Wajak Noongar, who is highly regarded as a public speaker, facilitator and negotiator. I'll put my glasses on. Barry's worked as a consultant and cultural advisor on a range of strategic projects across the corporate, mining and oil and gas sectors, as well as local, state and federal government structures. So welcome, Barry.
Good morning all, and thank you, Andrew. I'd like to acknowledge Ms Jessica Shaw, MLA Labor, member for Swan Hills, and Mr Hollingworth, and to special guests, ladies and gentlemen, and especially to our international guests and national guests. You know, when Aboriginal people travelled in here to this country from far and wide, and for us as a Wajak people, when we invited somebody, say from Northam, it's only just over the hill, or Mandurah, or just up in Mora, from those three countries, was to give them a welcome to country. The welcomes to countries was about helping them to understand how to be safe inside of this country, and to ensure that your spirit is strong so that you can go home strong enough to your family. Welcomes to countries was also how do we monitor you to see if we want to have you into our fold, into our family. Because a man would come, or his group would come, and they would stand in a distance and make a fire, and they'd be monitored for 24 hours to see whether they had a smile or not. And as simple as that, how do we smile? You see, there's many nations on this beautiful continent that we share now today. And how do we stand as one? With the many programs that are out there running from the organisations and government, is to see how to bring people together, but also to understand their cultural construct. How do they live as a nation of people? How do you insert that into those programs? How do we pay obligation to the way that they live? Simple. Or just to go and have a cup of tea. And we love our cup of teas, us as Aboriginal people. So welcomes to countries are about that. How do we ensure that each other's space in life exists together in balance? And where do we get that knowledge from? How does that exist? It exists inside of our elders. It exists inside of the people that have been written from their elders. You see, there are many books. And when my father was in his last days, he was sitting there and he said, "My son, I've written 7 books." And I said, "Yeah, Dad, okay." And he and I, we got on so well. We had our little jokes nearly every minute of the day. And I said, "Yeah, mate," I said, "Listen, I need to tell you something before you get into an explanation of why you've written 7 books. I said, I know that you're born under a little tree in a place called Mount Kogaby, Ballet Valley, near Beverly. I know that you only went to 1 year of school. I know that I had to help you understand English in the 1980s. And I know that when you read the newspaper, you'd look at the picture, and then I would explain it, what was written underneath. And you'd say, well, I was close enough to that story, son." "Okay, yeah, whatever, mate," I said. And he looked at me and he says, "No, son. Every morning you wake up and you look in the mirror, you're one of my books that I have written. When you think about the things that you know today, your mother and I have spent our time writing into you how we should be as a people. And so you think about the thousands and thousands of years of that us as Aboriginal people have been singing. And what this lake here actually means to us, the name Garlop. the understanding of where and how food was, the balance within the environment, is written in our elders. We stand with our old people until their last days, and that's a must. Because we'll never know how to step into it tomorrow if we don't listen to them. So I'm very honoured to see the many organisations coming here today to look at how to live with our elders. Age, you know, it's important. Our elders have seen life before we have. And we must keep always, we must continue to listen to them speaking. So from us as the Wajok people to the many nations here today, and to our international guests and our national guests, from us as West Australians, may my grandmothers and my grandfathers who have walked before me come to be with you. And for the time that you spend on our country here in the Wajok lands of Perth, Western Australia. May they hold you and keep you safe and heal you if you are unbalanced. Later on as you travel home to your family or to your place of rest. May they always continue to walk with you until you get back to your ancestors. Welcome to the lands of the Wajok people. Welcome to our lands that we share here with our West Australian brothers and sisters of many nations. And may you be safe until you travel home. And I'd like to share an old song that would have been sung around this lake because it belongs to Kings Park. And this lake is very important to Kings Park. It's very important to the Wajok people, or to the Moor River, which is what we call the Jingora, the Murda, the hill, the Milon, which is down at the Murray, and the Koranap, which is way out in the western waters, our heaven, where our spirits continue on to rest. Galopa, this place is important, and it exists within our elders. How do we bring our knowledge to sit with the knowledge that exists here today? How do we walk as one? So I'd like to share this old song for our international guests and our national guests from us as West Australians. Like this song has kept us safe and strong for thousands of years, and it will for us as West Australians and to everybody who visit. And thank you for having us. Wanare ga malana, wanare ga malana, boyongora waningo, boyongora waningo, wanare ga malana, boyongora waningo, wanare ga malana, wanare ga malana, boyongora waningo, boyongora waningo, wanare ga malana, boyongora waningo. So may the energies that exist here in our ancient land, the way it is done for our past and our elders of yesterday, who have written these things into us, may that energy also be written into our children of tomorrow, no matter what nation they come from. Because a sense of place is important. And it can only exist because how do our children and our elders continue to hold the hands of tomorrow's people? So thank you. May you have a great day. May all the energies come forth to help the knowledge that exists here to develop programs that'll balance us as a community. And welcome and stay safe. God bless.
I find it hard to speak after that. Sometimes in life you experience really special moments, and that for me was a really special thing to hear Barry speak the way he spoke, and also about where we're located and the fact that what this workshop is about today, and I think at any point in today where we're struggling to find a reference point for what we're here for, I think if we reflected on Barry's first words. And yes, with that I'd like to introduce Scott Hollingworth. Thank you.
Good morning everybody. As was said, my name is Scott Hollingworth and I'm the Interim Assistant Director General Strategy and Policy. It's my very great pleasure to welcome you here today for the second age-friendly workshop. The overwhelming response to today's workshop demonstrates that Western Australians are very much committed to building an age-friendly Western Australia. And we've got close to 120 people in the room today, including representatives from regional Western Australia, state government, local government, and the private and community sectors. You will be aware from the introduction in relation to my title that the state government has recently undergone some machinery of government changes. And as a result, the Department of Communities was born on the 1st of July, so we're just a matter of a couple of weeks old. And just by way of clarification, the Department of Communities includes the old communities components of the Department of Local Government and Communities, the Disability Services Commission, the Department of Child Protection, the Youth Justice components of the Department of Corrective Services, and the Department of Housing. So it's now a very large department indeed, and brings with it, of course, a significant amount of grunt as far as delivering things are concerned for the people of Western Australia. And indeed, we're very much clear that the role of the new Department of Communities is to provide improved services with better joining up of services across all of those areas, and through that hopefully we'll be able to work with Western Australians to actually cause them and help them to lead better lives. The newly formed Communities team are focused on ensuring that we all receive our services and support so that we can drive and thrive and make real choices. One key aspect of our work is helping older Western Australians to feel included, welcome and respected in the community, and to be able to do the things that they value. As a newly appointed affiliate member of the World Health Organisation's global network of age-friendly cities and communities, this is a role that we take very seriously, and I'd suggest that you all take very seriously for being here today. Building an age-friendly Western Australia, however, requires partnerships and collaboration. It requires all of us to work together and to listen to the needs of our older residents of Western Australia. Our strong commitment to working collaboratively across state, local government and community organisations has been very much recognised by the World Health Organisation in giving us that affiliate status. And indeed, it's the key connection with local government in particular that was very important in receiving that affiliation recognition. This collaborative approach was also a key in the success of the Life in Pictures short film competition. Life in Pictures was a unique creative collaboration between the state government, the Revelation Film Festival and Screen West. The competition used short film to stimulate community discussion about ageing. Later today you will also have the chance to see some of the films, including the winners, and they are really very, very good. Importantly, Life in Pictures celebrates the achievement of older people in Western Australia, drawing on different perspectives of what it means to age. Close to 50 films were submitted and over 250 people attended the screening last week at the Luna Cinemas. A key component of the success of the competition was the contribution of so many local governments and community organisations that promoted the initiative and participated. The state government intends to use the films submitted to continue its work to encourage community discussions about ageing and to celebrate the achievements of older Western Australians. Hosting today's workshop is part of our commitment to working collaboratively to create an age-friendly WA. The workshop program was developed based on feedback received from the 2016 Age-Friendly Workshop and the work of the Age-Friendly Interagency Group, which is a group of government agencies and UWA and local government, and there's a range of representatives here today if you wanted to meet them. I hope you find the presentations relevant and interesting and that you take away ideas to continue your work to build communities in which older Western Australians can lead fulfilling lives. Unfortunately, the Honourable Mick Murray MLA, Minister for Seniors and Ageing, was not able to come today. I'm very pleased, however, to welcome Jessica Shaw, Member for Swan Hills, to officially welcome you. Thanks very much.
Good morning, everyone. First of all, I'd like to pay my respects to the traditional owners of the land on which we meet this morning, the Whadjuk Noongar people, and acknowledge their leaders past, present and emerging. And can I also just reiterate how moved I was by the Welcome to Country. It's actually the second that I've heard from Barry Maguire. He is a very inspirational speaker, and always, I think, communicates very clearly the link between place and communities and the relationships, the very special relationships that the Indigenous community have. Look, it's my genuine pleasure to be here today, representing Mick Murray, the Minister for Seniors and Ageing, to officially welcome you to the second Age Friendly WA workshop. As part of my preparation for this morning, I reviewed the proceedings from the last ageing workshop, Age Friendly workshop, and I thought that seemed that there were some really fascinating discussions that were held. So I'm sure that there will be many more today. I'd like to acknowledge the attendance of Dr Jane Barratt, Secretary-General of the International Federation on Ageing, Logan Howlett, Mayor, City of Coburn, Rachel Thomas, President, Shire of Peppermint Grove, Don Gibson, Councillor, Shire of Chittering, Tom Barling, Councillor, City of Melville, Clive Robertson, Councillor, City of Melville, Robert Thomas, Councillor, Town of Cottesloe, Mark Teal, Chief Executive Officer of the Council of the Ageing WA, Jerry Clay, Chief Executive Officer, Independent Living Centre WA, and Rhonda Parker, Chief Executive Officer, Alzheimer's WA. Building communities in which older Western Australians feel valued, respected and included is a priority for this government. A key way of achieving this is by building an age-friendly Western Australia. 75 of Western Australia's local governments have received funding from the state government to support age-friendly planning or initiatives. However, a recent evaluation has found that many more local governments have been undertaking this planning without funding. Age-friendly environments is a global movement, and I think this is what interests me most in the approach. Worldwide, cities and communities are working so that older people are able to live fulfilling lives, so that they can participate in their community and stay connected to the people and activities that are important to them. The age-friendly movement is continually growing, learning, sharing and innovating. I look forward to hearing Dr Jane Barratt speak more about what is happening internationally later this morning. And as a state, we should be very proud of our leadership in this global movement. In June, the Government of Western Australia was announced as the first Australian affiliate of the WHO's global network of age-friendly cities and communities. This achievement reflects more than 10 years' work to build age-friendly communities. It sees WA join an esteemed list of international leaders. The state's membership reflects and acknowledges a commitment to listen to the needs of an ageing population. The state's acceptance into the global network reflects our commitment to our work to build age-friendly communities. This includes working across state and local governments and within the community and with the private sector to build communities that value older adults. Recognition as a global network affiliate is a significant achievement. I'm sure you will agree this is a key milestone and acknowledgement of WA's leadership in building age-friendly communities. However, we must continue to be innovative, to seek new ideas, and to work together to ensure our old people can live fulfilling lives. This is one of the reasons why today's workshop is so important. I encourage you to share your experiences and to speak openly about the challenges and the opportunities. In the room, we have age-friendly champions, local government elected members, community and private sector representatives. You are all here for a common purpose, to propel Western Australia forward as an age-friendly state. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you and to listen to you today, and I wish you all the very best for a very rewarding workshop. Thank you.
Thanks, Jessica. I've got the honour of introducing Jane Barratt. I was really lucky to attend a session with her yesterday, and I think you're in for an amazing 40 minutes and then question time. So, Jane.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. You know, in 12 months, such a lot has changed in our world. You know, in my world in North America, we have a whole new administration in the US of A. And just this morning on the radio, I found out that in Britain, retirement age for those in the 37 to 45 age group will be 68 years of age. That says something about our population ageing, the demographic shift and the cost to government of us living much longer. You know, one central point, you know, to consider is that we live in a very diverse world, and older people as a population are diverse and unique. So just as a recap, this is how we define age-friendly environments. And when we're talking about age-friendly, we're really talking people of all ages. And yet today we're particularly considering older adults. And for the course of the day, let's try and think about the language that we're using, because older adults versus seniors, you know, it's a different connotation. And I can tell you that the word seniors is certainly in the past as we go into our future. So it's true that the state of Western Australia was announced by WHO as an affiliate member. And thank you very much for making that note. It's certainly an auspicious announcement. The work starts now. Because what happens when you're an affiliate, you actually pledge an agreement with the World Health Organization, you know, a 3-year plan. And this plan has milestones. So the work has just begun. I also need to recognise the work of the department, you know, in coming into this process, because being named an affiliate, and it's not an affiliate in Australia, it's an affiliate globally. There are very few affiliates that are state and provincial in the world. So the team that put together the application and went through the hoops with the WHO really deserve a round of applause, because it's not easy. So, yes, state of Western Australia, and that's us, that's you, and the work that you're doing today and in the future. So that's the global network at the moment. You know, the 500th city was Paris. And just to give you an indication of, you know, the lay of the land, you know, the state of Western Australia is represented on the expert group that is really mapping out the future of the governance and management of the global network. So that's really something to be very proud of, but it's a very serious initiative. So I don't often put these, you know, profiles up, but I do want you to consider, you know, the changes in 2015 and 2020. So what we're talking about is certainly the globe is ageing. Population ageing is one of the demographic upheavals, the other two being globalisation and urbanisation, are very much here to stay. But the way we think about older people, the way that we talk about older people has got to dramatically change. There needs to be a fundamental shift in the way that we speak about older people, we are as older people, and the way that we create our environments for and with older people. So the words seniors, the word old age, the 65 cut-off, you know, that is actually changing around the world. You know, the way that we talk about older people and are as older people varies tremendously. And that's why the WHO and member states have decided that there will be a global campaign to combat ageism. On the one hand, we have the Atlantic, which is talking about old people are cool, the effortless hipness of senior citizens, yeah, right, you know. You know, there are few. But then on the other end of the spectrum, we have the Japanese minister, was the Japanese minister, saying, let elderly people hurry up and die. He didn't last very long in that portfolio because he was really talking about the cost of palliative care. So that was the end of the minister. But I think that you can agree that we actually run the whole gamut when we're talking about who we are as older citizens, people, and about older people. So these are the three very important reports, frameworks, through which age-friendly cities and communities come from. The first being the UN Madrid International Plan of Action on Ageing, the second, the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and the third, the WHO Global Strategy and Action Plan. I put these up here to give you a sense of the weight of the work that's being done in Western Australia. So these are the documents that your work is going to be fed into, because federal government has to report on the review of the MIPA every 5 years. UN Sustainable Development Goals, I'll show you in a minute how age-friendly and older people fit into that framework. And thirdly, the age-friendly environment priority is one of 5 priorities in the Global Strategy and Action Plan. These are the 3 priorities of MIPA, and these are the 2 in which age-friendly links closely: advancing health and well-being into older age and ensuring enabling and supportive environments. And these are the Sustainable Development Goals, and each of those dots is where older people fit in. Australia is reporting against the SDGs. They are actually going to be pulling information from all of the states around the activities with older people, for older people, and it links in to these SDGs. So we're part of a global plan and reporting mechanism. World Report on Ageing and Health, I won't go into it in great detail because we talked about it last year, but just to give you a reminder of the 5 priority goals. And measurement, monitoring and research is probably that Achilles heel when we come to how do we measure, monitor the impact of age-friendly cities, communities and environments. So I'm looking forward to listening to Loretta's discussion later today. To give you a reminder of the shift in the way of thinking about how we define health. In 1948, our thought was that it is a state of complete physical, mental and social well-being and not merely the absence of disease. But now in 2015, we're talking about it's a process and it's around function. So when I talked about the fundamental shift in the way that we think and act with and for older people, it's these 2 words. It's a process and it's about function. I bring this up because the common dialogue at a governmental level is around cost. The cost of older people, the economic and social cost, the burden of older people. And so you can see where health fits in. It's an important consideration constantly. So when I'm talking about there will be 2 billion older people in 2050, or there's 901 million older people now, or in 2040 in Western Australia, 1 in 4 people will be over the age of 65, the immediate thought is aged care. These people are going to require some services, etc. But we know that that's not always the case. It is important, though, to show you, the cost and the increased prevalence of people with non-communicable diseases, diabetes, lung disease, cancer, and cardiovascular disease. So the number of people in the world with those conditions in 2015. And it's not only the one, it's the complex comorbidities of these conditions which make it very difficult to treat an individual holistically, but also to be able to case manage. So that's the cost. WHO in 2015, the cost globally of diabetes, 825 billion. 12 billion for lung diseases. But what's more important to me is really the people, the functional implications of non-communicable diseases. So for example, someone with diabetes that doesn't have access to screening is likely to have diabetic retinopathy, diabetic macular edema, and they are not going to be able to manage their own care. So it's not the labelling of the conditions, it's the consequence on someone's function that is going to impact. If we then talk about age-friendly cities and communities, what do we need to do in that environment to enable a person with diabetes to actually know about the screening, get transport to the screening, know when their appointment is, manage all of their medications so that they don't get diagnosed with DR or DME. So that's where an age-friendly environment comes into play. It's not only about your park benches or the traffic lights or people knowing about a condition. We've got to look at this quite differently now. Briefly, health characteristics in old age. Here are some natural underlying changes that we will all go through in the ageing process. It's not bad, it's good, it's a natural process. But you can see the complexities, that are given rise to in older age. Let me explain this in a different way. Someone living in downtown Washington, DC, the average life expectancy is 55. If you catch a train 20 miles out, the average life expectancy is 77. And what's that saying to us? It's saying that where you're born, the kind of nutrition, the kind of education, the kind of opportunities that you have when you're born, where you're born, person, place, position, will carry with you throughout your life. So those that are living in a social disadvantaged situation from the get-go will actually have more poor quality outcomes. So we've got to think about that when we're also thinking about age-friendly environments. So you may have to look at what are the specific needs of your community. And if you look at the 8 domains, if collectively community could solve this issue, would it have a corollary effect on all of the other issues? Rather than take the 8, what are the 1 or 2 that's going to make that difference, the domino that actually shifts a person's function? That's what we need to be considering. Okay, this is quite familiar to you, talking about environment, and this would be familiar to you also, intrinsic capacity, the person, and the interrelationship with the environment. That's what healthy ageing is about. It's not only me, it's not only my physical, mental, social, it's the relationship that I have with environment. The hypothetical trajectories. I want to be on A, I want to, throughout my life, have a gradual, natural diminishing of function until I drop off the perch. We don't want to be C. If I can't be A, then I'll be B. And what I'm looking at there is someone, and it could be through, I've got diabetes, I haven't been for my screening, I have visual disturbances, I fall over, fractured neck of femur, hospital. So, the trajectory actually changes because there's been an instant. And I showed you this last year too, but just to remind you about, we're talking about the intrinsic capacity and functional ability. And throughout these 3 stages, if a person is in stage 2, and it's not a natural progression, so we're not all going to be sitting in significant loss of capacity, we always have the opportunity of improving our functional ability, but it depends on the environment. And that's why age-friendly is critical to be critically linked to healthy ageing. There's lots and lots of work being done on models around age-friendly. Do you know, I've often worked with these people, but I never know what to do with this afterwards. It looks great and it's up on the wall, but I actually want to be able to take it into a different place. But this is from Bristol. So there's been a lot of work and thinking. The 8 domains are not so prescriptive anymore. They are an important guide, but sometimes there's a lot of flexibility around it. And I'm just going to give you some examples. The strategy for Age Friendly was stimulated through the New Zealand Healthy Ageing Strategy. So you can see that, there are some elements of, the age-friendly domains, but they're not prescriptive. But what happened is that 2016 it was launched and it stimulated action around age-friendly at a community level. Here are the structural domains, but I really want to bring to your attention today functional domains and ask you this afternoon to be thinking about how structural and functional fit together. Okay, I want to go on and give you some examples. And what I've tried to do is take each of the structural domains and give you an example of what's happening somewhere in the world. So in Jerusalem, they have a specific program for under the rubric of employment and participation for 60 plus. And this came about from a single person that wanted to be re-employed. So it was a community discussion. It then went to an NGO. The NGO was sufficiently substantive and linked with the government in terms of advocacy that there was a funded program, a pilot program, and it's continuing to this day. So that's a good example of what's happening at a community level creates change, partnerships, and then redefinition of an older person. It's interesting, the IFA has been doing some really challenging work around cognitive reserve. And, we had some of the world thinkers from Australia coming to a meeting, an expert meeting around cognitive reserve, cognitive health and functioning. And one of the elements that they're talking about now is the importance of purpose. Whether it be paid work, unpaid work, continuous learning, education. So these interventions are actually critical to our cognitive health also. Burlington, Canada, the Home Share Program. The Home Share Program is where younger people and older people are in communal living, and the younger person has a substantial subsidy to actually be a carer, a care worker for the seniors, for the older people. In the Halton region, that's one of the reasons I live in Canada. It's fantastic. Yeah, very short-lived, but just magnificent. Winter's not so good, but anyway. And that's 440,000, all right, residents. Once again, the Senior Connector program, it actually responds to a need. What they did in the Halton region was they looked at their statistics. They looked at how there was shifts in the number of couples that were in the region and what had occurred. So this Connector program came out of the need of many widows being in one community. And so once again, it was a community-built program, and it's now funded by the local government. And it literally connects people to one another. This is another example from Baycrest, and Baycrest is one of the most eminent centres in the world in terms of brain health, and volunteers of all ages, but they've got particular group of older volunteers that participate in talking about the ageing process and dementia. Barcelona now. One of the areas that we don't understand really how to respond to most adequately is respect, inclusion, combating ageism, dignity. We know what disrespect is, but we don't know what respect looks like and feels like. And so there was a community theatre group that came together and not only worked with younger people and put on plays, but then started to have forums that were attended by people of all ages. Not so long ago, I was in Hong Kong at the first gerontological summit on ageing. And just to give you a sense of what's happening in Hong Kong and the innovation, it was across 3 days, and the organisers, which was the Hong Kong Council of Social Services and the government, were hoping for 25,000 attendees at the summit across 3 days. On the first day, they had 38,000 people through the doors. Right? And so, why? Because there's such curiosity and interest around how germ technology can actually be part of this enabling mechanism. And this is a gentleman who's a musician, and new eyes are new glasses that he can wear so that he can actually see his audience. In Sri Lanka, 1/4 of the population will be over the age of 65 by 2040, and one of the critical problems that were identified in the assessment of needs of older people was access to screening services for vision problems. So there's now camps. And this is funded by industry. Another example from Baycrest, a phenomenal innovation where virtual reality, this particular clip shows the woman is looking at herself in younger days along the beach. And you know, I'll give you the slides so that you can tap into that YouTube video. But it's a phenomenal response that she goes through in terms of her behaviour. And this is about education of healthcare professionals, and we see that as also part of age friendly because one of the structural domains is community health and services. Once again, education, and there's innovations in terms of, you know, online training, but it's actually very programmed so that you can evaluate yourself on the way. Newcastle on Time, the statistics that I looked at said that by 2017 there'd be 50 million people projected in the world with Alzheimer's disease. And one of the innovations in Newcastle on Time is to have one session per week that's dedicated to families and people with dementia, families of and people with dementia. The Kwai Sing district, their priority was priority seats at rain shelters. And Sol Salita, transportation. So in each of these examples, what's happened is there's been a very in-depth assessment, you know, of the needs of that particular group of older people versus what we think the community may need. It takes us back to this differential between the intrinsic capacity and the functional capacity. So in each of these examples, what we need to be looking at is how this program, this intervention, has actually improved the functional capacity of the person, rather than considering the chronological age of the person. Because we know that if there's an improvement in functional capacity and abilities, then there's much more likelihood that they will have the capacities to actually participate in community. So here are the elements that I look at when I consider an age-friendly environment: enhancing quality of life, functional status, and minimising symptoms. All right, I want to turn the tables now and give you an example around how a health condition can impact the person's function, and therein ask the question, what should we be doing? So the issue is pneumococcal pneumonia. We know that 1 in 5 people will have pneumococcal pneumonia over the age of 65. Here are some stats from Europe. 9,000 cases in Europe, 3 million annually, 1 million go to hospital, and it costs $10 billion per year. It's a lot of money. So we also know that there are particular groups of older people who are at risk of getting pneumococcal pneumonia, at risk of hospitalisation, and then at risk of the implications of hospitalisation. So, those with chronic obstructive pulmonary disease and asthma have up to a 13 times 0.5 more risk of hospitalisation and pneumococcal pneumonia. Chronic heart disease, 3.3. Diabetes, 1.4. This is a high risk group. We can also know that if you have COPD and diabetes, they're greater predictors of hospitalisation when you have pneumococcal pneumonia. What happens if you've got pneumonia and you're hospitalised or not hospitalised? Here are some of the symptoms. Weakness, cough, tiredness, body aches, wheezing, shortness of breath, weak appetite. They seem to be reasonable. Yeah? This is the problem. So, the prevalence of these symptoms, this is the functional abilities that are impacted by pneumococcal pneumonia. So, loss of balance, limitations in self-care, difficulty moving at home, kept from usual home duties, kept from visiting others, kept from going places. So we're becoming isolated, we're not able to move around our house, we've got a loss of balance, we can't see our grandchildren, we can't look after our grandchildren, and this can go on for weeks into months. So you can see it's a problem. So what would likely happen to someone in this situation? The thing that I immediately think of is they're going to fall. So we're going to have an incident where someone falls and they may be admitted to hospital. So let's look at falls. It's the second leading cause of accidental unintentional injury deaths worldwide, and this is the cost. 424,000 die annually. 37 million need medical attention. Cost per fall, $1,050 US. So what would you do? If you're thinking about this issue, it's a health issue, but it impacts function. And if healthy ageing was within a public health framework, and you're thinking about an age-friendly environment, what could be an intervention to prevent that? Falls prevention? Could be.
We're looking at designing houses that are hobless and
Could be.
so on. That can be designed.
Okay. Anything else?
Vaccinations.
Sorry? Vaccinations. Do you know the uptake rate of adult vaccinations for flu, for pneumococcal pneumonia, for shingles is extremely low worldwide. Even in Canada, where vaccines are free for flu, very poor uptake rate. Now, whether you're pro or con, that's irrelevant. But the issue here is that we actually need to back up and start talking about the ageing process and healthy ageing way back. So the conversation that we need to be having about ageing and how we want to live our lives into our 40s, 50s and 60s and 70s, it's actually a conversation that starts back here. Because this word called retirement actually doesn't even exist, because we don't retire from life. We actually stop doing something and start doing something else. And if we're planning for our future, our planning needs to include purposeful activity, novelty, new learning, education, unpaid work, paid work. That's the package of things that we know that evidence shows us is going to either maintain or improve our functioning. So it's that package of things, and they all fit into an age-friendly environment. So, in closing, function is central to the new narrative. It's not about disability, it's about how does the environment, how do we create this environment that enables us to do what we value, maintains and improves a person's function, and function is not only physical, it's the ability to connect socially, to be part of, to be worthy. And we know from the great Japanese study of the Okinawans that the single most important factor in longevity and healthy ageing in Okinawans is not only the food that they eat, it's about this reason to get up in the morning. Secondly, culture, gender and diversity must be recognised. I was delighted this morning because I had a coffee with one of my directors and I said, "How's your business, Graham?" "Good, good." And we're increasingly actually accepting older prisoners. And older prisoners, migrants, refugees, older LGBT people are part of our community that seem to actually be put to one side from time to time. So Age Friendly needs to respond to the cultural and diverse needs of our unique population. Evidence comes in all shapes and forms. It's not about the numbers. And that's why we need people like Loretta and her team at UWA and others to help us understand this very complex methodology that we're going to need to measure impact. Projects without monitoring measuring are of little value. They just feel good for us. They don't last, they're not sustainable. And I'm constantly reminded of the work of the City of Melville and how it's gone so far because they had the data. And so it's very, very important that part of our conversation this afternoon is not only about the next steps, but the next steps include how do we measure and monitor this? And vertical and horizontal policy development creates change. And what I mean by that is, you know, we've got this unique thing happening in Western Australia because it's a rare opportunity where actually people from different ministries are talking to one another, you know, about, you know, a common agenda. And it's about this life course approach to ageing that's a horizontal but also vertical. This is a plug for the IFA conference in 2018. And if anyone wants to know anything more about it, please let me know. And I'm just constantly in admiration and awe of the people that I meet in the course of my job. And, you know, I had an interview with a colleague not so long ago, and she said, "What makes a good leader? What is it?" And I said, "I'm not sure what makes a good leader, but what makes me is being humbled by the people around me. Because the people around me help make me who I am." And it's that for me, it's that kind of sentiment that enables me to get up every morning and to communicate what I know and what I believe in and openly listen to what other people. Yeah, I look at these pictures and see that they're a person demonstrating their uniqueness. And I thank you very much for the opportunity to be with you today. So if anybody's got any questions, happy to answer.
My name is Jennifer. I'm from the City of Subiaco.
Yeah.
First of all, great presentation, really inspiring. I just wanted to ask you, throughout the presentation, you referred to a lot of the initiatives as being community-driven. And within WA, local governments in particular are moving away from direct service delivery in the age-friendly space and moving more into kind of community development models and how we implement them in the community. And I wanted to ask you if you have any opinions on kind of the best community development models to use in this space.
I don't have an opinion as to what's best or good. I think what I come back to constantly is being very particular about understanding what the needs of the community is. I think that what we don't do well is we don't really understand who the people are, what their needs are, from a different lens now. I've talked a lot today about function. And I've talked, and I hope I've conveyed that, you know, within this functional framework, this healthy ageing framework, we have, you know, the intrinsic capacity. What are the health issues that give rise to certain levels of function, right? And then if we understand that, then what is the intervention? What is the community programs that are going to enable that person to do what they value. So it's, for me, and this is how my thinking has evolved. It's now not good enough to put in alternative transportation systems, whereas 12 months ago it was good enough for me. Now my understanding is much deeper, that we actually have to know a little bit more, because an alternative transportation system wouldn't help my mother, whose mobility issues are so significant, she wouldn't even attempt the public transportation system. So we've got to do a lot more exploration and understanding of the community that we're dealing with, you know, and the relationship of the community with the environment. Does that help? Yeah. I think also, you know, a lot of the work in Canada is based on community development models. So I'm happy to share some contacts there that you may be able to connect. I think it's also important to let you know that the IFA, in partnership with the WHO, is actually in the process of developing a mentor-mentee program. So I think the Western Australian, you involved in it, should be part of that program, that pilot program, because I think that's going to be important. Okay. Any other questions?
Jerry Clay. Hi, Jane.
Oh, hi, how are you?
Yeah, good. It's great to have you back here again this year. We're very fortunate. So my question comes from yesterday. I was fortunate to be at the OT conference, national, held here in WA, and there was a presentation around home modifications, and it really looked at, for the individual, for the consumer, how effective were the outcomes. And the results from it were indicated that the more the person had full say and participated in the approach that was implemented in their home, the more effective the outcomes in all kinds of different domains. So my question is, I wondered if you'd come across examples where that really strong co-design with people, older people who live in a community, was being able to impact on the age-friendly designs that were being put in place.
Yeah, great question. You know, and great study. I mean, OTs could have guessed what the outcome would be, but it's a great study. You know, some of the best work is being done in Scandinavia in terms of co-design, not only in terms of modifications, but also in the sort of the innovative ways generations are working together. So I think Scandinavia is where to go, and I can certainly give you some contacts there, Jerry. I think the other point to make there is the how we have, I say we, the collective, we have delegitimised the voice of an older person, and we do it constantly. And I think within family, and I often speak about my own personal circumstances within family, children need to understand how they manage their risk in watching mum and dad continue to be independent as they can. So it comes back to if researchers and community developers, local government are truly wanting older people to be part of the conversation and the solution, why aren't they leading the project? Because often they don't lead the project, they're just sitting at the table. And I'm curious, I mean, I'm the natural disruptor. I'd be really curious to see what would happen. And some of the instances that I've shown you, the examples, are very much led by, you know, older people. So I'd be very curious whether that could happen in this kind of environment, led. Okay?
Hi, Dr. Jane. My name is Ephraim Osarai, also professional bridge. I actually came here for a focus on how my group could facilitate more involvement of seniors with particularly the disadvantaged migrants in terms of mentor-mentee. But it also caught my attention when I looked around the room, the diversity of people here. So I just want to ask you from Canadian perspective, because I know that the Canadian migration policy is similar to Australia one, and I know that we try to invite people that are younger to come over to work, but I think there is an increasing population of seniors, even from the culturally and linguistically diverse people. So I just want to ask you, what's your perspective when you do similar things across the globe? Is this a kind of diversity you see in the room where we have less and less people of other callings and cultures?
You know, where I live in Toronto, I think there's about 135 different languages in the Greater Toronto area. So we talk about diversity. The words diversity are not often used, you know, in Canada. It just is. And I think when I see the differences between, you know, Canada and, you know, often in Australia, is that there is no attempt of integration, but there are communities of. And I think that's the difference. If we look at it in the context of age-friendly, it comes back to the point that I made to Jerry. You know, we as people that want to enable a community to live in the best possible way, in the most healthy way, need to be acutely listening to not only what the person says, but looking at hearing where they've come from and what they bring to, you know, this place and the issues. I think it's a conversation that we don't have on a regular basis here. I think it's a conversation that we need to have much more of. So I'm looking forward to you leading some discussions on this, because it's imperative.
My name's Anne Canham, and I'm an advocate with Advocare, and we deal with elder abuse and the issues around aged care and service provision. I've just been looking around the room and reflecting here and thinking about what you were talking about, inclusiveness. And I wonder how many people sitting in this room are actually over 65, so are within the cohort that we're talking about. And I also recognise that a lot of people here will go away with wonderful ideas and sit and have a consultative group within their structures. But the involvement of older people needs to be taken more seriously. And it would have been nice to maybe have seen here everybody who was a younger person bringing someone that was over 65 to also participate in this, and so that they could have their say. Because very often we see as older people, and I fall into that category myself, that decisions are made for us on our behalf with very little or very limited consultation to the group that the decisions are being made for. So I would ask that there is more inclusiveness as opposed to exclusion within the sector and decision-making abilities that are being passed on.
Look, thanks, Anne, for your comment, and I think it's worthy to have that comment. But, you know, I actually think that we're moving on. You know, the comment before I made was about we need, you know, are we delegitimising, you know, the voice of older people? And I stand by that. But I actually believe that we've moved on, are moving on. You know, there will always be those older people, and I'm one of them, you're one of them. Who cares? It's about people. You know, there are people that we actually can't get to. So even if we brought a person along, we're not getting to those older homeless, you know, those older prisoners, those older migrants. So, you know, I'm real. I want to be real in my answer, and that is that I believe that we are actually moving forward. I believe there are pockets in this room that actually are talking and are listening, and older people are joining in. And so there are opportunities from this group to actually take your points, and perhaps it's some of the principles that we want to work by in the future. I think your point is well made, but I also think we need to actually go, okay, we need to remember that, and we need to also move forward. So thank you.
Hi Jane, my name's Anne Buterac. I work independently with a personal and professional interest in ageing, but I was at your session last night and I was the one that Noreen referred to the speaker who asked the question about caring for older people, and the issue she raised was coping with older people who are afraid to ask for help. And I actually went up to her at the end of the session and we had quite an interesting conversation. But I applaud your comment about not delegitimising older people's voice, and I tried as tactfully as possible to take that position with her last night, that, you know, older people actually have the right to make the decision to live at home, fall down, break a leg, etc., in general terms. But I think there is a connection with that and an earlier point you made about people thinking ahead earlier. So these experiences of caring for an older person actually teaches you a hell of a lot about ageing too, and reflecting about your own personal ageing. But thank you.
Yeah, look, thank you, Anne. I was thinking about my comment from last night about walking with my father at 4 a.m. And as I was trying to navigate wet grass and lumpy footpaths, and I'm thinking, why am I doing this again? And it's to have a conversation with my father. But he takes risks every morning at 4 o'clock because of his balance, etc., etc. But that's his risk. And I actually have to live with that, and that's okay for me. Thank you.
I'd like to introduce Marlene Krasovitsky. She's the Campaign Director, Older Australians with the Benevolent Society. Prior to joining TBS, Marlene was the Director of Willing to Work, the national inquiry into employment discrimination against older Australians and Australians with disability with the Australian Human Rights Commission. So I'd like you to welcome Marlene. Thank you.
Now, I would like to start today by sharing some work with you that we're doing at the Benevolent Society. At the Benevolent Society, we're committed to building a campaign to tackle ageism, and we're calling it Every Age Counts. I'm going to come back to our campaign at the end of the presentation today, but as part of this work, we've been trying to unpack what actually drives ageism. Most of us know what ageism kind of looks like, but what are the drivers of ageism? What are the attitudes and beliefs out there about getting older and about older people? And so we've been asking people across all ages a range of very, very simple questions. And I'm going to give you a selection of responses here today. This is the sort of range of responses that we're getting. It sucks. I'm anxious about my financial security. It's fine as long as I've got control. I want choice, independence. I'm concerned about being a burden. It's inevitable. Shoot me. Euthanize me, and so on. I'm fearful. That's the sort of, it's a selection of responses, but the proportions are about right in terms of positives and negatives. The next question we ask people, what words do you associate with getting older? Again, a selection. Slow, death, frailty, funerals, grumpy, lonely, nursing homes, loss of confidence, bowls, bingo, and so on. Again, both positives and negatives, the proportions are about the same as the much broader sample we're getting. And there's certainly some very good stuff in there. But for the most part, it doesn't really appear to be a stage of life most of us are looking forward to. It's also a very undifferentiated bunch of words. There are no distinctions between people in their 60s and people in their 80s, in the same way as you might expect there to be distinctions between questions if you ask people who were 15 versus 35. And our recent research also tells us that people have very, very different ideas in their heads about what it means to be old. For some people it's in their 40s, for other people it's 100. Regardless of all of that though, given that bunch of associations and those words that are coming up, I would suggest you might struggle to find work. Now we know that here in Australia and many other nations, we're living longer, healthier lives, and that's a good thing, right? But you'd be hard pressed to know it. If you read a lot of government publications, if you read media stories, the alarmist rhetoric of the tsunami of baby boomers and the crisis and the burden and so on, I must say I heard a particularly unsavoury one the other day that I definitely will not use, and it's called the age bulge. So, yeah, we'll put that to one side. Anyway, we know that Australians are also redefining growing older and challenging many of the myths and assumptions and stereotypes. But our cultural norms, our societal attitudes and our expectations are just much, much slower to follow, and they're simply not keeping up. And we continually bump up against these outdated models, policies and ways of thinking. So today I want to do a number of things. I want to discuss the various stages and faces of ageism, particularly within the specific context where many people identify and experience ageism, and that's when they're looking for work or at work. I want to talk about the impacts of ageism and why we should do something about it. I'll also cover a few examples of good practice to get you inspired, and then I'll come back to our campaign, Every Age Counts. Now today I'm not going to start with graphs and statistics. I think Jane gave us an incredible overview, and I'm sure you're familiar with some of the ones within Australia as well. But I do want to talk about some stories, and these are stories that are drawn from the Willing to Work National Inquiry. Let me tell you about Elizabeth. Elizabeth had a very, very positive, long-standing association with her employer. She'd been filling a replacement contract for this employer when the incumbent that she had backfilled had decided to retire, and so the position was advertised. And of course Elizabeth put in an application and presumed she would be a very strong candidate. She knew that the interviews were happening and she hadn't been told when her interview was. And so when she asked, she said actually she wasn't going to get an interview because the organisation had a policy that when someone retires, they want to replace them with someone younger. Elizabeth was told they were looking for a new generation. Abel is in his late 50s and had worked as a cleaner for many years. Abel is deaf, and instead of communicating by a two-way radio with his supervisor, he communicated by SMS. When the cleaning company changed ownership, Abel's new supervisor complained about having to communicate by SMS. After 6 months under this new supervisor, Abel was told that he had not passed his probation. There was no reason given, and Abel actually wasn't aware that he was on probation. But after this experience, he decided that there was really no point in him looking for further work. Sasha works in a leading residential aged care facility. She's like many people who work in her sector. English is not her first language. She's 59, and prior to working in aged care, she had a whole other professional life. She loves her new work, and she feels empowered in a way that she never has before, and she loves working with the people who live at her workplace. Recently, the organisation arranged for a film crew to come in and to shoot a promotional video for the organisation, showcasing their work. The crew was there all day and filmed a great deal of footage about the things that happen over the course of a day. And despite being filmed for the better part of that day, Sasha told us how disappointed she was that she had not made it into any of the video, and that the whole video exclusively featured the younger female care workforce and their interactions with the people who lived in that facility. I went away, I couldn't believe that story. I watched that video and Sasha was 100% correct. Now, I wish I could tell you that these stories are one-offs, but they're not. And the stories I've chosen, I hope, also demonstrate for you some of the intersectionality with issues not only around ageism, but around sexism and discrimination against people with disability. So let me just start with ageism and talk a little bit about what it looks like, and then answer the question, well, so what? So we know that ageism is prejudice expressed toward anyone because of their age. But many of us have internalised ageist attitudes. They're so much a part of our social norms and language, it's sometimes really hard to spot them, let alone identify them as discriminatory. Ever joked about those seniors moments or about being over the hill? And I know I sure am guilty of buying a friend one of those annoying birthday cards that says, sorry, you're another year older. The irony is, of course, that somebody much wiser than me who said that when we're ageist, we set ourselves up for prejudice against our future selves. Now, most ageist attitudes and stereotypes are negative. For example, older people are vulnerable, helpless, useless, sick, forgetful, slow, weak, incompetent, and a burden. But a few are superficially positive, like the cute little old lady, the sweet old man stereotypes. But these stereotypes also serve to disempower older people because they discourage others from seeing them as capable adults with a full range of human complexities and capacities and attitudes and needs as anybody else. Likewise, there are very superficial positive images of the extraordinary older person, the amazing marathon running granny, the septuagenarian supermodel, the unbelievable octogenarian bodybuilder. These serve also only to reinforce these people as exceptions to the norm of slow, weak, incapacitated, unattractive, which is what most older people are. Now, ageism has a profound impact on the way older people are perceived and underpins exclusionary behaviours and discrimination. We know that age discrimination in Australia is common, yet data collected by Commonwealth, state and territory human rights and anti-discrimination agencies confirms that complaints and inquiries of age discrimination are brought at lower rates than discrimination against other types, other protected attributes. Why? Because it's also well documented that many people who experience ageism on the basis of their age don't take any action. There are many reasons for this underreporting, including perceptions about the legal process, costs, the emotional toll of pursuing a complaint, fear of victimisation. However, it's also because ageism is so normalised. Ageism causes us to accept discriminatory practices as natural, normal, inevitable. For instance, discriminatory recruitment practices, accepting the inevitability of disease as we age, laughing along with those hurtful jokes, but also the other impacts of ageism can include involuntary early retirement, unemployment, underemployment and social exclusion. And of course, as Jane reminded us today, ageism is real across the ages. This is not about feeding into generational wars. It's really about our particular focus at the Benevolent Society is the ageism against older people. Okay, so let's get to the what. Ageist attitudes and assumptions create hard barriers for older people in many areas, and today, as I said, I want to focus on workforce participation, and here I'm going to draw on the Australian Human Rights Commission's prevalence survey of age discrimination in the workforce, as well as the Willing to Work inquiry. Let's look at the prevalence. According to Australia's first national prevalence survey on age discrimination, 27% of people over the age of 50 reported having recently experienced employment-related age discrimination. That's a horrible figure, but wait, there's more and it gets worse. A third of those who experienced age discrimination gave up looking for work. There was just no point. In addition, 43% of those who reported experiencing age discrimination did not take any action. Of those that did take action, only 5% of them came to an external agency to lodge a complaint or make an inquiry, and only 14% took it up within their own organisation. For those that did take action, the most common form of action was leaving the job. What a waste. We also know that while older people generally have a lower unemployment rate than younger people, older people have greater difficulty finding subsequent employment when they do become unemployed. According to the figures behind me, in November 2015, the average duration of unemployment for older people was 68 weeks, compared with 49 weeks for 25 to 54-year-olds and 30 weeks for 15 to 24-year-olds. Okay, they're the numbers. Let's see how that translates into people's experience. These are the sorts of things that people were telling us through the inquiry. When people are looking for work, the sorts of things they're hearing or they're telling us, it's as if I've got a use by date on my forehead. Stigma, age equals lazy, unwilling to learn, you're a workers' compensation risk. I never felt my age until I had to look for work. Euphemisms for not getting the job. You're overqualified, you're too experienced. But also lots of euphemisms for when people are trying to attract younger people. We're looking for someone dynamic, we're looking for someone energetic, we're looking for someone vibrant, and so on. I won't go through all of them. In terms, just to pick out a couple of them, in terms of career progression, people will tell us very regularly that they were stopped being offered training opportunities or promotional opportunities because the assumption is you're just waiting for retirement. For redundancies, when there are restructures, older people are often targeted, maybe because they're the most expensive to retain, maybe because the company wants to go through transformation. And from employers and recruiters, taking on an older worker is seen as a social service rather than an acknowledgement of the value of the older workers. Older workers were seen as unionised, inflexible. They won't adapt to change. Industry is focused on innovation in order to stay relevant, and that's not something you typically associate with older candidates. Recruiters told us if they, the recruitment company, sent older workers to a company, the company would stop doing business with them. And this was a particularly interesting quote from an older person himself who'd been a recruiter. My usual instinct was to find reasons not to employ an older person, and I know my colleagues tended to do the same. This reluctance to employ someone older seemed quite normal. It would have seemed unusual, if not foolish, to hire someone much older. Okay, so I've quickly covered the quantitative evidence, the qualitative evidence. Again, let me get to the so what. Let's look at the impact of ageism on labour force participation and the economic and business case for doing something about it. Let's look at the labour force participation. We know, again, as I mentioned before, that the labour force participation of older Australians, particularly older women, has been rising considerably in the last few years. But despite those increases, labour force participation continues to decline rapidly with age. So between 55 and 59, 73.8% of people are in the workforce, which drops very, very sharply to 12.7% for those aged 65 and over. And of course, this contradicts government efforts to make us all work longer. So it's a very interesting graph, and this pattern is not shifting anytime soon. In terms of complaints, I said that complaints were brought at lower rates than other protected attributes, but by far the nature of the complaints that are brought, 70%, are around employment. So let's turn now to why we should do something about this. Let's look at the economic benefits. The economic benefits of boosting mature age participation are well established, and you've got two major reports behind me, the Grattan Institute and Deloitte Access Economics, both of which slightly different numbers, slightly different methodologies, but the numbers are huge in terms of small percentage increases in lifting the labour force participation rates of older people. The additional element that Deloitte talks about is that in addition to the direct benefits to the national economy, Deloitte notes that there are other, of course, indirect benefits that arise from high participation, like increased retirement savings, reduced welfare costs for future governments, better social inclusion, and improved health outcomes over time. In terms of the business case, bodies such as the Australian Chamber of Commerce and Industry and the Australian Institute of Management identify a large number of benefits for businesses in increasing the participation of older workers, including those that you can see behind me. One of the ones I want to really zero in on, though, for a few minutes is this very, very enduring myth about productivity, this very pervasive myth about the lesser productivity of older workers compared with their younger counterparts, because this assumption is often at the heart of early retirement policies. Now again, there's a bunch of studies and some very, very compelling examples from around the world that simply refute that assumption. A review of published research carried out by Essex Business School found very, very little evidence to back up ingrained stereotypes of older workers when it comes to productivity, health commitment, or flexibility. Their study found that age doesn't determine a person's commitment and productivity levels at work, and there are many other social and psychological factors that are in fact much better indicators. They found that older people are often faster at carrying out complex tasks that allow them to draw on their contextual knowledge and years of work experience. While bottom line speed may deteriorate, and that's a big may, the overall efficacy of older people offsets any impact to productivity. And there's a couple of really neat, very short examples I want to share with you from Germany, which is the country with the largest ageing population in Europe. And it's Mercedes-Benz and BMW. The key findings of the analysis of Mercedes-Benz was that productivity actually rises all the way up to retirement, and that older workers make fewer serious mistakes and are able better to cope when things go wrong. The authors themselves described these findings as striking because the jobs that these people were doing relied on physical strength, dexterity and agility, which they thought would decline with age. But that any negative effects that were associated with the ageing were outweighed by the positive effects, such as the ability to cope when things go wrong. The BMW study, I find fascinating, found that the value of making small ergonomic changes to a production line which was staffed by people nearing 50 years old was demonstrated to return much higher productivity. Within 3 months, the production line improved its productivity by 7%, absenteeism was halved, and the defect rate dropped. And what was that small ergonomic change? Rather than the workers having to get on gurneys and slide under the car and do whatever it is they needed to do, they flipped the car so that people could stand at height and work on the car. Simple change. The case for reform is clear. The benefits of increased employment participation for older workers extend not only to the individual workers involved, but also to employers and the national economy. And employment discrimination based on ageist assumptions is a huge cost to our economy, to say nothing of the cost of conciliating complaints or the personal costs of experiencing discrimination. Happily, I can give you some good practice examples, and these are just 3. There are many, many more that I can share with you. But there are increasingly employers out there that recognise that diversity is good for business, and that having a mix of older workers in their workforces is very, very important. And they've done a number of things to do that. So Westpac's Prime of Life program, all about flexible work hours and arrangements, transition to retirement in their enterprise agreement, mentoring, champions networks and so on. Accor offers a work experience program for people who are 60 and over. It's like an internship, but people associate internships with 17, 18-year-olds or apprenticeships. This is for people 60 and over. They're introduced to all aspects of the business, and then there's an interview with HR. No guarantees of a job, but many people who go through that program are converted into employees. Okay, they're big businesses. I'm also happy to say that there are a number of small to medium enterprises that are looking at this very, very carefully. And they did a very, very careful age-based analysis of their workforce, because they understood that over the next number of years, very short number of years, they were going to lose a major section of their workforce. And not only just in sheer numbers, but of course in terms of understanding, knowledge and skill. So based on that analysis of their workforce, they developed a range of strategies with the older workers themselves, which was around planning. How many years did people want to continue to work? What sort of work did they want to do? How could they best share their knowledge and experience and skills with the rest of the workforce? They had conversations about how they could support people's health, transition planning, but also a really close review of the way they did business, and again, making some ergonomic changes and workforce health and safety changes. So, as I say, there are a number of other examples, Australian examples and overseas examples, but in terms of what the recurring themes are in all these companies, it's about flexible work, it's about support for older people, but most importantly, it's simply about having a conversation with people rather than making assumptions about what they want just because they hit a particular age. It's also really about understanding their workforce and their business imperatives. There is no single one-size-fits-all approach, but there is a lot of creativity and good practice out there. And for those of you in the room who are in decision-making roles in terms of your HR attraction, recruitment, retention policies, I would invite you to have a look at your own policies and practices through this particular lens to ensure that your workforces are as diverse and strong and productive and appropriate as they can be. And so, To Every Age Counts, our campaign. So the Benevolent Society is in the very, very, very early days of pulling together a campaign to tackle ageism. I've talked today about the impacts particularly of ageism in workforce participation, but this will be a broader campaign. This obviously will need to be sustained over many years. Our initial planning and thinking is our first decade. So what the program will do is to challenge ageism and pervasive negative stereotypes and start to change the existing discourse and our language about ageing and so on and so on. I won't read through the dot points there. Clearly, we will not do this alone. This will be a coalition-based approach. We will work with other non-government organisations, businesses, governments, academics, journalists, influencers, and they're the people that we are surrounding this campaign with as we speak. And of course, at the heart of this, it'll be driven by older people themselves. There will be a variety of elements to the campaign. This will not just be a marketing or a social marketing campaign, although obviously that will be part of it, but it'll be a deeply political process as well. We'll be working very hard to engage our political leadership at all levels. It'll be underpinned by research and evidence, and that's where we've started. And of course, popular mobilisation of older people and members of the community more generally. So, if you want to get involved, this is my email address, and we would very, very warmly welcome your participation, your ideas, your energy, your support. As I say, we're in the very early days of building the campaign, and we would love to work with you, because our view is that an ageing world doesn't have to be an ageist world. Thank you.